He opened the security app expecting to catch her lying. 15 maids before her had failed, stolen from him, pitted his children, left Karen and Maren more isolated than before. So when Bernard Morin saw the blindfolds wrapped around his already blind twins' faces, his jaw clenched. Then he saw them move. Karen and Maren navigating the playroom like ghosts, hands never touching walls, feet never stumbling, turning their heads toward sounds he couldn't even hear through the speakers. The maid Tina, standing perfectly still in the corner just watching, just clicking her tongue in a rhythm. Bernard's phone screen cracked under his grip. His breath caught in his throat, and the man who had built an empire on seeing everything realized he'd been blind to what was happening in his own home. 3 years ago, Bernard Morin lost everything that gave his power meaning. His wife Elena died in their bedroom. 3 bullets from a rival syndicate meant for him. She threw herself in front of the shooter, took the rounds that had Bernard's name on them. The twins, Karen and Maren, only 5 years old, were in the room. They saw their mother fall. They saw the muzzle flash. They saw the blood. What they didn't see was the sunrise the next morning. Or ever again. The trauma-induced blindness came fast. Psychogenic visual loss, the specialists called it. The brain protecting itself by shutting down sight. Mr. Morin, there's no physical damage to the eyes or optic nerves. This is psychological. Recovery is uncertain. Possibly never. Bernard heard the words through a fog of rage. He was already planning the retaliation that would leave 12 men dead by week's end. He didn't have time to process that his daughters had gone dark. Weeks bled into months. The girls didn't improve. They sat in their bedroom, small bodies pressed against each other, eyes open but unseeing. Bernard flew in therapists from Vienna, purchased experimental treatments that cost more than most people earned in a lifetime. Nothing changed. The girls didn't see. They barely left their room. And Bernard, alone in his fortified mansion with blood still under his fingernails, started to accept what the doctors said. His daughters would never see a sunset, never read a book, never look into his eyes again. He buried that hope right next to Elena in the family plot. Then came the caregivers. 15 in 22 months. The first lasted 4 days. Said the girls were creepy because they stared at nothing. Bernard had her escorted out by armed security. The second seemed competent until he caught her on camera pocketing Elena's jewelry, pieces the twins were supposed to inherit. She left in handcuffs. The third was a plant from a rival family, sent to gather intelligence on his security systems. She left in a body bag. After that, something calcified inside Bernard. One maid had tried to convince the girls their blindness was God's punishment for their father's sins. Another had locked them in their room for hours while she entertained her boyfriend in Bernard's study. Each one came with references and left with his paranoia deepening. Bernard stopped seeing caregivers. He saw threats. He saw angles. He saw people who would either neglect his broken daughters or exploit them for leverage against him. He installed cameras in every room. Every corner. Thermal, audio, motion sensor. A 30-screen command center in his office that made intelligence agencies look amateur. He watched the footage every night, rewinding and zooming, looking for the moment of betrayal he knew was coming. Looking for the angle everyone had. Looking for proof that the world was exactly as predatory as he'd always known it to be. Tina Churchill was caregiver number 16. Quiet. Firm. No social media presence. No family to speak of. A ghost of a resume. She'd answered his ad with a handwritten letter that simply said, "Your daughters don't need pity. They need preparation." Bernard hired her because she was the first person who didn't cry during the interview. He watched her on the cameras because he was certain she was hiding something. He kept his finger on the trigger, metaphorically and literally, waiting for her to reveal what she really wanted. He just never expected what he'd find. If this story pulled you in, please subscribe and stay with the channel. More unforgettable stories are coming. Bernard Morin didn't blink as he pressed the intercom button. His eyes stayed locked on the monitor showing the nursery. Camera 3, angle 2, timestamp 1447. Maria. My office. Now. The woman on screen flinched. She'd been reaching for Karen's medication bottles with hands that had no business being there. Bernard watched her shoulders tense, watched her glance around the room like she could somehow sense his gaze crawling over her through the lens. She couldn't. But she knew. They always knew when they'd been caught. 3 minutes later, Maria stood in front of his mahogany desk, hands clasped like a penitent in church. Bernard didn't invite her to sit. He never did for these conversations. You accessed the medication cabinet at 1443, he said, his voice flat as sheet metal. My daughter's prescriptions. The clonazepam specifically. He turned his laptop screen toward her. Footage showed her slipping 2 orange bottles into her cardigan pocket. Were you planning to tell me you needed anxiety medication? Or were you just going to let my blind children go without theirs? Maria's face drained white. Mr. Moran, I can explain. Don't. Bernard rose from his chair, 6'3" of controlled violence in a tailored suit. You're the 15th person I've trusted with my daughter's lives. The 7th who's stolen from this house. The 3rd who's stolen from them specifically. He pulled an envelope from his desk drawer, pre-prepared like all the others. Your severance. Sign the NDA. You have 20 minutes to collect your things before security escorts you out. Please, Mr. Moran, I have rent. You should have thought about rent before you became a thief. He pressed the intercom again. Victor. Escort Maria to her quarters. She's leaving. The door opened. Victor, 240 pounds of silent enforcement, filled the frame. Maria's eyes went glassy with tears, but Bernard felt nothing. No sympathy. No guilt. Just the familiar cold weight of another betrayal confirmed. She signed. She left. Bernard returned to his monitors. 30 screens flickered in the dimness of his office. Every room. Every angle. Karen and Maren sat in the playroom, their small bodies motionless on the carpet, heads tilted toward sounds only they could hear. They didn't know Maria was gone. They wouldn't ask. They'd stopped asking about the maids months ago, stopped getting attached after the 4th one disappeared. Bernard's jaw tightened as he watched them. 2 fragile lives in a world designed to break them. He'd killed men for less than what Maria had done. But killing didn't fix the problem. The problem was that he couldn't do this alone, and everyone he hired proved the same truth. People were predators. People had angles. He pulled up the employment agency's website and began typing another job posting. Maid number 16. Maybe this time would be different. But Bernard Moran had stopped believing in maybe a long time ago. Bernard kept a photograph in his desk drawer that he never looked at anymore. Elena, laughing in their garden, sunlight caught in her dark hair. The twins wrapped around her legs like vines. He'd stopped opening that drawer 2 years ago. Some images didn't need to be seen to burn. The night it happened, Bernard had been in his study negotiating a territorial dispute with the Volkov family. Whiskey on the table, guns underneath it. Standard business. Elena had put the girls to bed an hour earlier. Karen in her blue pajamas, Maren in pink, both of them giggling about something only 5-year-olds found hilarious. He could still hear that sound echoing through the vents. Then came the screaming. Bernard moved fast but not fast enough. By the time he reached the bedroom, the shooter was already inside. Dmitry Volkov's youngest son. Eyes wild with cocaine and revenge, gun raised toward Bernard's chest. Elena stood between them in her nightgown, arms spread wide like she could shield him with flesh and bone. She could. She did. 3 shots. Center mass. She fell before Bernard could reach her, before he could push her aside, before he could do anything but watch her body crumple to the floor. The girls were screaming from their beds, tiny hands pressed over their eyes, trying to unsee what was already seared into their minds. Bernard put 4 bullets in the shooter's skull before the man hit the ground. Then he dropped to his knees beside Elena, pressing his hands against wounds that wouldn't stop bleeding. Her lips moved, trying to form words, but only blood came out. Her eyes found his one last time, not afraid, just sad, and then they went empty. Karen and Maren were still screaming. Bernard gathered them both in his arms, their small bodies shaking violently, and carried them from the room, away from their mother's body, away from the spreading pool of crimson, away from the man whose brain matter decorated their princess wallpaper. He held them in the hallway while his security team swarmed the house, while sirens wailed in the distance, while his daughters sobbed into his blood-soaked shirt. "Daddy, I can't see," Karen whispered. Her eyes were open, pupils dilated and searching, but she stared straight through him. "Me neither," Marin whimpered. "Daddy, where are you? I can't see you." Bernard looked down at them, his daughter's eyes wide and unseeing, and felt something crack inside his chest that would never heal. The doctors would later explain it. Psychogenic blindness, trauma-induced, the brain's mercy-killing site to protect against horror. Reversible, possibly. With time, with therapy, with luck. But Bernard Morin's luck had bled out on a bedroom floor with his wife. He'd hunted down every member of the Volkov family in the weeks that followed. Methodical. Thorough. Erased them from existence like they'd never drawn breath. But vengeance didn't restore his daughter's sight. It didn't bring back Elena's laugh. It didn't stop the twins from waking up screaming in the dark they could no longer escape. All it did was confirm what he already knew. The world was a bullet with everyone's name on it, and the only way to survive was to see it coming. His daughters couldn't see anything anymore. So Bernard would watch for them. Every second. Every angle. Every threat. He'd never blink again. Bernard was reviewing shipping manifests when Camera 7 caught his attention. Movement in the playroom. He tabbed over to the feed, his coffee halfway to his lips, and froze. Tina Churchill stood between his daughters with two black silk scarves in her hands. Karen and Marin sat cross-legged on the carpet, faces tilted upward, waiting, trusting. And Tina was tying the fabric across their already sightless eyes. The coffee mug hit the desk. Bernard's hand was already reaching for his phone, security on speed dial, when he stopped himself. Watch first. Confirm. He'd learned that lesson with maid number 9. Fired her for suspected theft only to find out she'd been reorganizing the silverware. He needed evidence, not assumptions. He leaned closer to the screen, his pulse hammering against his collar. Tina stepped back, examining her work. Both girls now wore blindfolds over eyes that saw nothing anyway. The absurdity of it made Bernard's jaw clench. What possible reason? "Can you hear me?" Tina's voice came through the audio feed, calm and measured. "Yes," the twins said in unison. "Good. Now listen. Not with your ears. With your whole body. Feel the room." Tina began walking in a slow circle around them. Her footsteps were deliberate, heavy enough to hear. "Where am I, Karen?" Karen's head turned, tracking the sound. "Behind me. 4 steps away." "Marin." "Moving left. You're near the bookshelf." Bernard's knuckles went white around the edge of his desk. This was insane. His daughters didn't need to be blindfolded and interrogated like prisoners. They needed stability, gentleness, protection from a world that had already brutalized them. What the hell was this woman doing? Tina stopped walking. The room went silent. Bernard held his breath, waiting for the girls to panic, to reach for the blindfolds, to call out in fear. Instead, they sat perfectly still. "Now," Tina said softly, "I'm going to move without sound. Tell me when you feel me close." She removed her shoes, moved across the carpet in complete silence, her steps invisible even to the sensitive microphones. Bernard's eyes darted between Tina's position and his daughters' faces. The girls couldn't possibly know where she was. They were blind, blindfolded, in a silent room. Karen's hand shot up. "There. 2 feet in front of me." Tina had stopped exactly where Karen pointed. "Marin. Behind Karen. You're blocking the air from the vent. I can feel the temperature change." Bernard's chest constricted. He rewound the footage, watched it again. The girls were guessing. They had to be. Statistical probability, lucky coincidences, Tina somehow signaling them. But then Tina pulled a tennis ball from her pocket and tossed it across the room. It bounced off the wall with a soft thud. Both girls' heads snapped toward the sound in perfect synchronization, tracking its arc, its trajectory, movements far too precise for children who'd spent 2 years locked in darkness. "What is this?" Bernard whispered to the empty office. On screen, Tina knelt between his daughters. "You're doing beautifully. Tomorrow we'll work on echolocation. Clicking sounds. Mapping rooms with your voice. Echolocation. Like bats. Like his children were animals being trained for some kind of..." Bernard's thumb hovered over Tina's contact. One call. She'd be gone within the hour, just like the others. But his eyes pulled back to the monitor, to Karen and Maren sitting straighter than they had in months, to the small smiles creeping across their faces. "Again," Maren said. "Throw it again." Bernard didn't make the call. Not yet. But his fingers stayed close to the button. Bernard found Tina in the kitchen after the girls had gone to bed. She was washing dishes by hand, even though they had a dishwasher, her movements methodical and unhurried. She didn't turn around when he entered, but her shoulders tensed slightly. She knew. "The blindfolds," Bernard said, his voice low and controlled. "Explain them." Tina dried her hands on a towel before facing him. Her eyes were steady, unflinching. Most people couldn't hold his gaze for more than a few seconds. She didn't look away. "They're learning to see. They're blind. Their eyes are blind, Mr. Moran. Their minds aren't." She folded the towel with precise corners. "What I'm teaching them is called mental mapping. Spatial awareness through sound, air pressure, temperature differential. The human brain is capable of constructing three-dimensional maps of environments without visual input. Your daughters are learning to build those maps." Bernard's hand flexed at his side. "By blindfolding children who can't see? That's not teaching. That's cruelty." "Is it?" Tina's voice remained calm, but something sharp glinted beneath it. "What's cruel is letting them believe they're helpless, that they need to be watched and protected every second of their lives, because the world is too dangerous for blind little girls." She took a step closer. "You've built them a cage, Mr. Moran. A very comfortable, very monitored cage. I'm teaching them how to leave it." The words hit like a blade between ribs. Bernard's jaw tightened. "You work for me. You don't get to make decisions about." "The blindfolds removed their last crutch," Tina interrupted. "Karen and Maren lost their sight, but they've been compensating with ambient light perception, shadows, vague shapes. The trauma didn't destroy their optic nerves completely. There's still faint input, not enough to see but enough to create dependence on what little remains. The blindfolds force them to ignore that useless data and rely on what actually works." Bernard stared at her. "Echolocation. Among other things. Clicking sounds bounce off surfaces and return with information. Distance, texture, density. Bats do it instinctively. Humans can learn it. Some blind people navigate cities better than sighted ones because they've trained their brains to process acoustic data, like visual information." She pulled out her phone, played a video. A blind man riding a bicycle through traffic, clicking his tongue, weaving between cars with impossible precision. Bernard watched the screen, his throat tight. "Karen and Maren are young," Tina continued. "Their brains are plastic, adaptable. What would take an adult years to learn they can master in months. But only if someone actually teaches them instead of wrapping them in bubble wrap and hoping they survive. I'm keeping them safe. You're keeping them dependent." Tina's voice softened, but the words still cut. "Safe and helpless are not the same thing, Mr. Moran. Right now, your daughters can't navigate their own home without guidance. In 6 months, I can have them mapping buildings with sound. In a year, they could walk through a crowded room and identify every person by footstep and breathing pattern. But only if you let me work." Bernard's hand curled into a fist. Every instinct screamed to fire her, to shut this down, to return to the predictable routine of watching his daughter sit motionless in supervised rooms. But he'd seen them smile today, for the first time in 2 years. "You have 3 months, he said finally. "I'll be watching every session. The moment I think you're harming them, you'll have me removed." "I know." Tina met his eyes. "Watch all you want, Mr. Moran. You might learn something too. She walked past him, leaving Bernard alone in the kitchen with the security app still open on his phone. 30 cameras blinking their silent judgment. 3 months became 6. Bernard watched every second. At first, the changes were subtle. Camera 12, playroom, 9:15 Tina teaching the girls to click their tongues in sharp, precise bursts. The sound seemed absurd, like bird calls in a cathedral, but the twins practiced for hours. Click. Pause. Listen. Click. The echoes painted pictures Bernard couldn't see. By week 8, Karen could identify the difference between the leather couch and the velvet armchair from across the room. Just from sound. Just from how the clicks returned to her ears. Week 12, camera 4, hallway, 14:30 Maren walking heel to toe along the corridor. No hands outstretched, no hesitation. She'd memorized the distance between door frames. 17 steps to the bathroom, 23 to the stairs, 31 to her father's office. She never miscounted. Bernard rewound that footage 6 times searching for the trick. There wasn't one. Month 4 brought the footstep training. Tina walked through the mansion in different shoes. Heels, sneakers, boots, barefoot. The girls sat blindfolded in the playroom, heads cocked like radar dishes, calling out identities. Victor, 238 pounds. Favors his left leg from the old knee injury. Mrs. Chun, the cook, wearing her orthopedic clogs. Daddy. That last one stopped Bernard cold. Camera 7, timestamp 1642. He'd been walking past the playroom door, 30 feet away, trying to be silent. Karen's head had turned toward him anyway. How did you know? Tina's voice on the audio feed. His breathing, Karen said simply. He holds his breath when he's trying to be quiet. Everyone else just breathes normally. Bernard sat back in his chair, something uncomfortable shifting in his chest. His daughters were studying him through walls, learning him, seeing him without eyes. Month 5, the heartbeat exercises began. Tina would have the girls sit in complete silence, focusing on the pulse of blood through their own bodies first, then expanding outward, teaching them to feel the microscopic vibrations of another person's cardiovascular system through changes in air pressure. It sounded impossible. Bernard watched Karen place her hand near Tina's wrist without touching it and say, 72 beats per minute. You're calm. Then Maren. Daddy's standing in the doorway. His heart rate just spiked. 90-something. He's angry or scared. She was right. Bernard had been both. Angry that his daughters were becoming something he didn't recognize. Scared because they didn't need him anymore. By month 6, camera 18, grand foyer 11:23, both girls descended the main staircase without touching the railing. 27 steps, each one placed with balletic precision, their clicking tongues mapping every surface, every angle, every potential misstep before their feet found ground. Bernard's security team watched from the corners, hands twitching toward the girls, ready to catch them. But Karen and Maren didn't fall. They landed on the marble floor and kept walking, navigating around furniture that had been moved that morning. Objects they couldn't have known were there. Except they did know. They clicked twice and heard the mahogany dresser that hadn't been in the foyer yesterday. They'd felt the air currents shift around the new vase on the side table. Bernard scrolled through 6 months of footage that night. Hundreds of hours. Thousands of small victories. His daughters weren't just surviving their blindness anymore. They were weaponizing it. And he had no idea what Tina Churchill was actually preparing them for. Bernard found the inconsistency on a Tuesday. A single line item in Tina's background check that didn't quite align. Her references were immaculate, her credentials verified, but her employment history had a 3-year gap she'd attributed to private care work abroad. He'd accepted it at the time. Now, 6 months into watching her transform his daughters into something extraordinary, the gap felt like a wound he needed to probe. He made a call to Dmitry Koslov, a fixer who specialized in excavating graves people thought they'd buried deep enough. 2 days later, an encrypted file landed in Bernard's inbox. He opened it at 2 a.m., the mansion silent except for the hum of his servers. The first document was a birth certificate. Tina Marie Churchill, daughter of Vincent and Sarah Churchill. He scrolled down. Vincent Churchill, former Marine, decorated marksman, dishonorably discharged in 2009. Reason: undisclosed. The next file made Bernard's blood freeze. A police report from 2018. Vincent Churchill, found dead in his apartment from a single gunshot wound to the head. Ruled a suicide, but the detective's notes suggested otherwise. Inconsistent powder burns. No note. A man with no history of depression suddenly eating his gun. Bernard's fingers moved faster, clicking through photos, incident reports, surveillance footage from a convenience store 3 blocks from the death scene. And there, time-stamped 2 hours before Vincent's body was discovered. A grainy image of a black SUV. The license plate traced back to a shell company Bernard recognized immediately. His shell company. One of a dozen he used for off-book operations. The next document was a personnel file. Vincent Churchill, asset ID visa 7743, contracted for wet work, 2012 to 2018. Bernard scrolled through the assignments, mostly clean work, nothing that should have triggered blowback. Until the last entry. Asset expressed moral objection to Target Protocol 447. Refused termination order. Became potential liability. Recommended retirement. Permanent. Bernard remembered Protocol 447. A witness who'd seen too much during a territorial acquisition. The witness had a daughter. Vincent had been ordered to eliminate both. He'd refused. So Bernard's people had retired him instead. And Vincent Churchill's daughter, blind in one eye from a childhood accident according to the medical records, trained by her father in the same spatial awareness techniques he'd learned in Marine reconnaissance, had spent the last 3 years working her way into Bernard Moran's home. Tina wasn't here to help his daughters. She was here for revenge. Bernard's hand moved to his desk drawer, fingers wrapping around the cold steel of his pistol. Every camera feed in the house populated his screens. Camera 14 showed Tina's bedroom dark and still. Camera 7 showed the twins sleeping peacefully in their room. Tiny chests rising and falling in synchronization. 6 months. She'd had 6 months of access to his children. 6 months to poison them against him, to train them into weapons she could turn loose when the moment was right. She'd made them strong, yes, but strong for what purpose? So they could survive when she finally struck? So they could watch him die the way she'd watched her father bleed out in a rented apartment? Bernard stood, gun in hand, moving through his mansion like smoke. Tina Churchill had signed her own death warrant the moment she'd lied on her application. The only question now was whether he killed her quickly, or made her understand exactly what happened to people who infiltrated Bernard Moran's family with false pretenses. He reached her bedroom door and raised the pistol. Then he heard it. Soft crying from the twins' room, and Tina's voice, gentle and low, singing a lullaby in a language Bernard didn't recognize. His finger hesitated on the trigger. Bernard was 12 miles from home when every screen in his car went black. He'd been sitting in gridlock on the interstate, returning from a meeting with the Castellano family that had run 3 hours longer than planned. His phone showed 23 missed calls from his security chief. He was about to dial back when the emergency alert fired. A single word that made his stomach drop. Breach. The backup generator should have kicked in within seconds. The mansion had triple redundancy, military-grade fail-safes designed to survive everything short of a nuclear strike. The screens stayed black for 4 seconds. 5. 6. Then they flickered back to life, running on emergency power. Infrared mode. Every camera rendered in ghostly green and white. Bernard's hand shook as he pulled up the feeds. Camera 1, front gate destroyed, the reinforced steel peeled back like a tin can. Camera 3, eastern perimeter. 2 bodies in security uniforms, heat signatures fading. Camera 7. The playroom. Karen and Marin sat on the floor, blindfolds still in place from their afternoon training. Tina stood between them and the door, her body tense, head cocked like she was listening to something Bernard couldn't hear through the speakers. Then the main power died completely. Every light in the mansion cut out. Bernard watched his daughters disappear into absolute darkness, the infrared cameras now the only eyes that could see them. His heart hammered against his ribs as he screamed into his phone. "Victor! Get to the playroom! Now!" Static. The line was dead. On camera 18, 3 figures moved through the ground floor, thermal signatures bright against the cold mansion walls. They moved with tactical precision, weapons raised, heading directly toward the east wing. Toward the playroom. They knew exactly where his daughters were. Bernard's foot, the first man through the door, never saw it coming. In fairness, he couldn't have. The room was pitch black, his night vision goggles useless in the absence of ambient light. He swept his rifle in an arc, searching for heat signatures, for movement, for anything. Tina's hand shot from the darkness and redirected his barrel toward the ceiling. The gunshot deafened, plaster raining down. She twisted his wrist until bone cracked, stripped the weapon in 2 fluid motions, and drove the stock into his throat. He went down gurgling. Bernard watched it happen in infrared, his knuckles white around his phone. The camera captured what the intruders couldn't see. Tina moving with surgical precision, while the twins remained perfectly still on the floor, heads tracking the violence by sound alone. The second man fired blindly into the room. 3 shots, wild and panicked. Bernard's heart stopped as bullets punched through the wall 6 inches from Marin's head. But Marin had already moved. Both girls were on their feet now, blindfolds still in place, navigating the chaos like they'd rehearsed this 1,000 times. Karen clicked her tongue twice, sharp, precise, and tilted her head. Second shooter, northwest corner. Breathing heavy, heart rate elevated. Third man behind him, Marin added, her voice eerily calm. Lighter footsteps. Hanging back. Tina's heat signature dropped low. Protocol 3, she said quietly. The twins scattered. Bernard had seen them practice Protocol 3 on the monitors, a drill he'd assumed was just another exercise. Now he watched them execute it in real time against armed killers. Karen moved left, hands trailing along the wall, using the furniture position she'd memorized months ago. Marin went right, her footsteps silent, her breathing controlled. The second shooter spun toward Karen's movement, rifle tracking. "I got one." The antique lamp hit him in the temple. Marin had thrown it from 8 feet away in complete darkness, her aim guided by the sound of his voice, the rustle of his tactical vest, the directional shift of air when he turned. He stumbled, disoriented. Karen clicked again. Down. Tina was already there, emerging from the darkness like something that had always lived there. She swept the man's legs, drove her elbow into his solar plexus, and relieved him of his weapon before he hit the ground. The third man broke. Bernard could see it in his heat signature, the way his body language shifted from predator to prey. He backed toward the door, firing suppressive rounds, trying to create distance. But there was no distance in a room the twins had mapped down to the millimeter. "Air vent at 3 o'clock, Karen said. "He's blocking the airflow." "Temperature drop of 0.7 degrees, Marin confirmed. 6 feet 2 inches. Standing in the doorway. Tina didn't hesitate. She threw the rifle she'd taken from the second man like a javelin. The thermal camera showed it spinning end over end through the darkness, crossing 12 feet in under a second. It caught the third man in the chest, knocked him backward into the hallway. He went down hard, gasping, and didn't get up. Silence fell over the playroom. The twins stood perfectly still, chests heaving, blindfolds still in place. Tina moved between them, hands on their shoulders. "You did beautifully. Both of you." Bernard's phone slipped from his trembling fingers. On screen, Karen reached up and removed her blindfold. Her sightless eyes stared straight ahead into darkness that looked no different than the light. "Is Daddy watching?" she asked quietly. Tina glanced at the camera, her expression unreadable in the infrared wash. "Yes. He's always watching." Bernard arrived home to flashing police lights and body bags. Victor met him at the gate, alive but limping, a pressure bandage wrapped around his shoulder. "The girls are safe, boss. Tina had them in the panic room before we even." Bernard didn't wait for the rest. He took the stairs 3 at a time, his heart a drumbeat against his ribs, not slowing until he reached the playroom door. Karen and Maren sat on the couch, wrapped in blankets, hot chocolate steaming in their hands. They looked small again, fragile. But Bernard had seen what they really were, what Tina had made them. He dropped to his knees in front of them, hands shaking as he reached for their faces. "Are you hurt? Did they touch you?" "We're okay, Daddy." Karen's hand found his cheek with impossible precision. "Tina kept us safe." Tina stood by the window, her knuckles wrapped in medical tape, a bruise blooming across her jaw. She watched him with those steady eyes that had never flinched, not once in 6 months. Bernard stood slowly. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. "I know who you are," he said finally. "Vincent Churchill's daughter." The twins went silent. Tina's expression didn't change, but something shifted in the air between them. "I wondered when you'd figure it out. You came here for revenge." "I came here because your daughters were going to end up dead or helpless, and I couldn't let that happen twice." Her voice was quiet, steady. "My father tried to save a little girl once. Your people killed him for it. I'm not here to make him proud. I'm here because Karen and Maren deserve better than being collateral damage in their father's war." Bernard's throat tightened. "You could have killed me 100 times. I didn't want you dead." Tina glanced at the twins, then back at him. "I wanted you to see, really see, that the cameras and the guards and the control, none of it was keeping them safe. It was just keeping them weak." The words landed like fists. Bernard looked at his daughters, at their small bodies that had moved through darkness like ghosts, had survived trained killers using nothing but sound and memory, and the strength someone else had given them. Not him. Never him. He'd been watching for 6 months and seen nothing. "You were going to exile me," Tina said. It wasn't a question. "Yes." Bernard's hand moved to his jacket, to the termination papers folded in his inside pocket. He pulled them out, stared at them for a moment, then walked to the fireplace and dropped them into the flames. "I'm giving you a raise," he said, watching the papers curl and blacken. "And permanent quarters. 3rd floor, east wing. The room with the balcony." Tina's eyebrows rose fractionally. "Mr. Moran." "Bernard." He turned to face her. "My daughters call you Tina. I think I can manage your first name." For the first time since she'd arrived, Tina Churchill smiled. It was small, cautious, but real. Bernard crossed the room and extended his hand. "Thank you. For seeing what I couldn't." She took it. Her grip was firm, calloused, the hand of someone who'd spent years fighting battles he'd been too blind to recognize. "Daddy." Maren's voice cut through the moment. "Can we take the cameras out of our room now?" Bernard froze. He'd installed those cameras before the girls could walk, had watched them every night to make sure they were breathing, that they were safe, that the world hadn't stolen them while he blinked. He looked at the monitoring app on his phone. 30 screens. 30 angles. 30 ways to see everything and understand nothing. "Yes," he said, and the word felt like exhaling after holding his breath for years. "We can take them all down." Karen and Maren smiled, genuine, unguarded smiles that cameras had never captured. That night, Bernard sat on the floor of the playroom while his daughters taught him to click his tongue and listen to the echoes. He was terrible at it. Kept clicking off rhythm, couldn't distinguish between the bookshelf and the couch, felt ridiculous sitting blindfolded on expensive carpet while his 7-year-old children corrected his technique. But he didn't reach for his phone once. And when Karen's hand found his in the darkness, guided only by the sound of his breathing, Bernard Moran finally understood what it meant to truly see. If you enjoyed this story and felt the tension, please consider subscribing. It really helps the channel. And more Mafia stories are on the way.